Just normal, regular.
My
No, that's not regular. That's not regular.
Creative.
Can you say My Life Creative?
My Life Creative.
My mom would have to be the biggest influence on my creativity. And I say that because while I was left-handed, and I was always told that left-handed people are more creative. Right, well, that involves going back pretty far, you know.
I do know. Well, you could encapsulate it pretty well. You're articulate.
And then I was getting a PhD, and I was traveling the world talking about suicide and writing books about suicide and talking, and doing all that stuff.
And welcome to My Life Creative. I'm Richard Zombek. I'm here with my wife and my partner, Pamela Joy.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going all right.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to this interview. You did this interview with
Our friend
Michelle
Michelle.
Rusk. Yeah,
Yes.
our friend Michelle. She's been to our house. She lives in New Mexico. You've done a lot of photography for her. She's an interesting little nugget, isn't she?
She's got so much going on. Sometimes she gives me anxiety, and I said as much. Just so much
stuff.
She covers a lot of ground, and I was really interested to talk with her. She's not a photographer, right? She creates in a lot of different mediums and formats, predominantly writing, but I just feel that we've watched her really explore and try a lot of different things. She's always kept up with the writing and has always kept up with the blogging and the social media. She's one of the most disciplined people I know when it comes to that. And it doesn't, she still does all these other things. It doesn't make her crazy. Her approach to it is very nonchalant. But this past year, in really watching things come together for her brand, Chelle Summer, it's just like the meeting of everything that I don't know how to describe it, but it's really I feel like we've watched somebody go down a path and really throw themselves hard into every place it took them, and to be coming out the other side and really seeing where all of that sort of blossomed. So she took us from the beginning all the way to where she is now. It's a beautiful story. She's a very layered, interesting person, and I think
from DNA on up.
Yes, there's so much here that I think will be appealing to a lot of different kinds of viewers, listeners, not just people who photograph or people who make art, because she's so dimensional in so many areas, cooking and writing and home and just her lifestyle. It's crazy.
Right, and her creativity stems from a lot of different areas. And what I've always found very interesting and inspirational about Michelle is that she's super resilient, right? She's not one of these people who, something goes wrong and she just goes, F it. She keeps reinventing herself and redoing stuff, and she just does it because she feels like it, which I find just in my own life to be just an impossible task.
Yeah, she makes being grown up be very fun in a very creative, interesting way.
Yeah, well, and I also want to remind everyone that you can find all the information on all of our different guests on My Life Creative. I sometimes forget to mention that, but we do have show notes and links to their websites and their work and everything like that you can go check out yourself. So, without further ado, let's listen to the interview with Michelle Rusk.
Sounds good. I'm more interested in, especially with you and your story, and how I've watched the whole thing unfold from when I knew you, and I know there was a whole part even before I knew you, but I feel that from the point I've known you, I've been watching you sort of go through a long creative process that has finally borne its fruit, if you will. So I thought what would be good is to kind of go back to where you began from school and writing and where you started out, and then where things sort of led to the point that I met you.
Right, well, that involves going back pretty far, you know.
I do know. Well, you could encapsulate it pretty well. You're articulate.
Well, then just tell me when to start.
Go.
Okay. You know, I won't say, my mom would have to be the biggest influence on my creativity. And I say that because while I was left-handed, and I was always told that left-handed people are more creative, my mom always made sure that we had crayons and we had paper. My grandfather was a doctor, and we had piles of paper pads from drug companies. And my other grandfather worked for the University of Chicago Press in binding or printing. And I didn't know it at the time, but we have, and I still have some of these. They're book jackets that just pieces, and we just had stacks and stacks of paper. My dad was in a project engineer, and we have all these rulers that are from companies. I don't have one in front of me, but it's they're people that help create things to put us on the moon. So we always had things around us, and every Christmas we'd get crayons and markers, and we had this. My sister has it now. We had this huge bag of crayons because all the leftover crayons would get thrown in there because you always got a new box for school in the new year, and then they're the old ones. So we always had that around. So there was always a lot of drawing. But the other thing was that and this is in my stuff somewhere, I believe we were in Texas for a vacation. This is like 1977. I was in first grade, and I think it's the Holiday Inn Stationery from Brownsville where we were staying, and it was a little story that maybe I was younger, but I couldn't quite write it all yet. I had drawn some pictures, and I think my mom wrote the little story. So I was also encouraged to make little books, of which I did. And so I knew when I was 6 years old, I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to write books, and I wanted to write fiction books. It wasn't something I wanted to write nonfiction. I knew that. And then I hit fourth grade, and it's just all continued. I had a really good teacher in third grade who then went on to be moved up to the fourth grade teacher. She was very instrumental in my writing and just always very encouraging. And we had this thing called Author of the Month, and they would like make your book. They would bind it and put it in the library, and my book was called Lost. And they would type it out, and then you would do the pictures. And it was about this turtle who didn't really want to be around her little sister, which I had one of those. So I'm sure it was more, biographical than I would admit at the time. And when I got to sixth grade, and I was reading something the other day that our memories are like flashbulbs and that we don't necessarily remember things as they really are. So I don't know if this is just how I remember it. Somewhere around sixth grade, someone said, that's great, you want to be a writer, but you are going to have to support yourself. And that was when journalism was introduced to me. And I joined the school paper, and just totally took off for me. And when I got to high school, and I took all the art classes in junior high, I took every art class that was offered. And let me back up about the sewing, is that my mom taught me how to sew on one of my grandmother's sewing machines that my mom had, and then my younger sister and I would make Barbie clothes, and she even remember mom gave us her bridesmaids dresses, and we cut them apart and made them into different dresses and did all sorts of things. But the interesting thing also about junior high is that I did not get to take sewing because they put me in the construction class, and which was not where I wanted to be, and I was one of two girls, and the other girl moved away, and so and then I got to high school, and I got really into running and writing, and I didn't take any art classes in high school. Never took an art class again, except at my freshman year of college. When I was at a small school in Chicago, I took some sort of art appreciation thing, but I never took another sort of creative art class. I took a lot of writing classes. And when I went to college, where I was going to get a degree in journalism, because I was going to get this degree in journalism, I was going to become a writer. But I knew that, I had to support myself somehow, so I had this journalism career. And I went my sophomore year to Ball State because I didn't go there my freshman year. And to this day, if you ask the woman who taught the creative writing classes, she will tell you that I showed up in her office before school started, or when school started, said, "Please, I want to be in your class. Here's my manuscript." And so I just always knew that was what I wanted to do. And the interesting thing, too, is that it ties back to my younger sister, who I shared a room with for 10 years. And, we did everything together, whether I wanted to or not. She was part of who I was, and she knew I would say she probably knew more about me than anybody else. I didn't recognize that until much later. And when she died, my junior year of college, when she killed herself, and it threw everything off. And suddenly, while I didn't forget my writing, I had a sense that I was supposed to do other things, and those things were to become a track. I became a high school health teacher, and I taught English as well for a while, and I became a track and cross country coach. And the writing didn't get forgotten because I still had some fiction I was working on.
But wait a second. So I thought that at that point you became more of a grief counselor. You didn't do that.
I never did clinical work, and I don't have a clinical degree. And so what happened, I was a junior, so I finished the magazine journalism degree, and I moved here to New Mexico, and I got a master's degree in health education to teach, and a teaching license.
Okay.
And yeah, everybody thinks that I have done clinical work, and I've never done clinical work. I've done research, and I didn't want to do. I never had. Well, let me say, I thought I'd do clinical work for like a year. That there was a point, like in 7th grade, where like, oh, I'll become a counselor, kind of thing. But no, I never had an interest in that, and so.
So you were kind of going along because you're like for people who don't know you and everything that you just said, you get an impression that life was a lovely whirl of writing and drawing and painting and sewing, and like you as a little kid didn't sit still. You just continue to do a lot of different things, and you would maybe work on something over here and then go over here and then go over here, and writing sort of tied everything together. And then you get this news, which is traumatic. You went through, I'm sure, a very I know what that feels like to have life kind of shift, and like the ground comes out from under you and you don't know where you are and where your standing is, and everything does change after that. So from that, your trajectory shifted.
Right.
And did you still like create during that time? Was it primarily running and health education and teaching? Did you paint at all? Did you bake?
Well, what's interesting is there are a lot of things that I think I've forgotten that I did. Like and it's because people sometimes will bring these things up. I was known for making pumpkin bread and my paper bag pizza, and I had forgotten that. And I think particularly when I got to, well, that was at Ball State too. And when I got to graduate school, I mean, I did all this baking and cooking. I did do all of that still. And I did the sewing when I moved to New Mexico, and I had a neighbor across the street who taught me how to quilt. I had learned how to quilt in Girl Scouts to some extent, but Bonnie really taught me how to quilt. And when I married the first time, we made the dresses. She did most of the work on my dress, but we made the bridesmaids dresses and the flower girl dress, and we did all sorts of fun projects. We made wreaths. My ex-husband would go to Maine to work, and he drove, and he came back with all this rope on. He's like, have him bring nautical rope back. And he did. And we spray painted it, and we glued shells on, and, we did all sorts of things. And so, but then I reached a point about the time that that's when a lot of things changed. My ex-husband he'd been hit by a drunk driver, and there was a brain injury involved, and there was a struggle, and that was somewhere in that time. I stuck to the writing, and then Bonnie died, the woman I was talking about, and I had all this fabric, and I inherited so much stuff from her, like the whole craft room. Her husband joked he wanted to and she was in her 70s, but her husband joked he wanted to put a piece of dynamite to the whole thing because there was so much stuff. But I was like, I didn't know, I had reached this point with quilting. It's like, all right, I can make all these quilts, but who wants that? I mean, and then everybody was having babies, and I couldn't keep up with that. And I was like, well, I don't know that that's what I want to do. And so, but the writing was what I stuck to. I just believed that. And then I was getting a PhD, and I was traveling the world talking about suicide and writing books about suicide and talking, and doing all that stuff
and helping people along the way, because I've met many of them.
And so life became I wasn't doing the creative stuff. I wasn't the writing was the only thing, but even that got left behind. Then I woke up one day. I mean, I didn't wake up from sleep. I mean, I woke up like somewhere and I had the thought, I'm like, and it was about 2000. It was before I got divorced. I can't remember, it was the year the Australian pen pal came out, my first fiction. And I just said, I don't want to wake up and be 60 years old and be like, oh my gosh, where did time go? I've always wanted to be a writer. Why am I not doing that? And that was when the shift started, that I realized that I really needed to come back to, particularly the writing was what it was at. And because I didn't really think I was going, I got rid of, like I said, I got rid of a lot of the craft stuff and the sewing. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with any of this. And I gave it away. And including some of the things I gave away, and my mom and I gave away, she had saved fabrics and some clothes, and which I'm really sorry for, because but at the time I didn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Now I know what to do with it. And so in my mind now it's about recreating some of those things, which maybe that's what it was supposed to be. And when my dad died, I had stuff from him that I eventually got rid of. I didn't know what to do with some of his clothes that now I'm sorry. And so it was, the shift began. And then when the divorce came, then again, it was the writing. And I think what I can see now, and I was thinking about this over the last few days, is I've gotten really good at taking time to write 5 days a week, and to take that time. Now, I haven't done it today because I had a doctor's appointment at 9:00 this morning. Had to be, and it was at the hospital where the office is, and it was one of those things where you're going to get lost. You have to leave really early, and because they'd moved offices, and so I didn't get to write yet today. But after we're done here, this is like the last thing I have on my schedule that I'm going to go write. But I try to put it in first thing in the morning before the day. Same with my running. I mean, I try to put these things in first thing in the morning, because if the day gets away from me, that's it.
Do it.
Exactly. And
well, why don't you tell people what your day looks like? Because I've experienced it, and it's rather remarkable. So why don't you describe your typical day? What does Michelle's day look like?
Well, a weekday is going to be different than the weekend, because I actually have a job, which people don't know. I work in a major research study, looking at it's what happens to families who've lost active duty service members. So the creativity is also important for that, because I still, even though I'm not doing the suicide work, I still am talking to grieving people. And that's important for me to be able to keep my balance because my job is not to help them. My job is to collect data. And there's a new study coming. It's going to shift a little bit, but it's still going to be grieving people. But so it depends on if I have interviews. But, I get up at 4:40, and I get up at 4:40, as crazy as that is, because I know that gives me enough time before the day gets away. And I also get up at 4:40 because Lily, the German Shepherd, needs to be run before everybody gets in the park. And so I'm at my desk before 8. And one of the things I have to do is social media. I have to devote time to social media every day. And I get all of that done. I catch up on email, and then I write 3 pages. And the goal is, I didn't do it for January, because January I just came to the end of a rough draft. And so I had other things I had to take care of. But it's the beginning of February. It's February 1st. And now it's, okay, we're back to 50 pages. It's a short month too. So I can't skip today, because there are only, so many days I can take off to get those 50. So I get the 3 pages in, and, a variety of other things. I do have a 5-minute prayer. That's important. I blog. I'm down to blogging once a week. I decided that I needed to focus more on the fiction, and rather than blogging so much. And then
so not every day. I'm sorry to interrupt, but not every day do you, because all of this, like, I almost get anxiety hearing you tell all these different things. So when you say you social media every day, do you have a plan in mind, or do you wing it?
No, I don't wing it. I typically have a plan in mind, and it's a real struggle to me to decide what is worth posting and what's not. And, I don't, or let me back up and say, I think things have changed. And it's, I can do really well on Instagram. I do horribly on Facebook, or the other way around. I have the most followers on Twitter, but I don't know that many people see things on Twitter. And My blogs, I don't do enough on Pinterest. My blogs are the only thing going there right now, and but I typically have a plan in place because it's just easier that way. Then that means less time to think in the morning about what I'm going to do so that I can move on to the next thing. And I've kind of got to the point where I try to take one day off a week from it. But I have separate pages on Facebook too. I have a Chelle Summer page. I have my writer page. I have my personal page, and so I have Chef Shell page.
I see. Anxiety here. Anxiety.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know how you keep up with it all, other than to say, I've seen it firsthand, and you're very disciplined with your time. You are one of those people who can slot, I'm going to do this now, and you actually do it. Whether you feel like it or not, whether it's rolling or not, you do it anyway. And I think it's been a long time now that you've been doing that. It just sort of comes out. You trust, maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I struggle with, and I know a lot of people do, with time. And we've talked about it. I'm a great waster of time. I do not seize the moment. I kind of fall into, that word sloth sort of fits me really well some days.
It's easy to do. It's easy to do.
But you are up at very early. You run your dogs. You do a little cleaning. You have your smoothie. You do your writing. You do your errands if you have any. I know you have certain days you do errands, and then if you're...
And I go to state sales.
Yep. And oh, you do... See, when do you... all these different things. So taking this, so your social media and your kind of whole business planning, do you like sort that out the beginning of each month so that you have kind of a general theme and what you're going to write on each week? Or do you plan that out a year in advance, or do you do it a week at a time?
Oh, it's probably a week it's a week at a time. And a lot of that, because it depends on what's going on. It depends on what's going on in terms of like the time of year. Obviously, Christmas is, I already have to start thinking about Christmas now, though, for next year in terms of business stuff. But it's, what I'm going to write about is typically a week in advance. I wrote the other day, I actually didn't think I wrote a very good blog entry, and I did actually got feedback from LinkedIn. Somebody sent me a note, and that's when my husband asked me, when do you ever go to LinkedIn? And I said, only to post my blog. So and even the blog posts, I kind of have them in mind, but the social media posts, Instagram, Facebook, I don't always know. And then I kind of debate and I see how things did. And then I'm like, well, maybe I don't want to post tomorrow. And, because things are not looking so good. And I posted on Instagram late today because I was trying to find my way around a hospital. And, so it just depends on things, but I try to have and then my schedule, I know that I have a lot of interviews next week for the study. And so it's kind of squeezing things in. But the other side is we're having a Chelle Summer party in Chicago in a few weeks, and I'm trying to be ready for that. And I think that there's a couple things. One, the hardest thing for me is things don't move as quickly as I'd like them to move. And I get stuck, like I was stuck on the serger for a half hour yesterday. I'm still learning it and threading it. And I finally think I figured out what I was doing wrong. And so I think it'll go much quicker next time. But I have to switch it between the two types of stitches that I use. And so that can be time consuming. But what people don't know typically about me, and I had this discussion with Greg the other day, because I do a lot of stuff on weekends. I'll rest if I need to, but because he's like, you do more in a day than the majority of people. And I said, I don't get to be creative full time. And I remember once I heard Cyndi Lauper talk about writing songs while she was ironing, because she didn't have the, girls just want to have fun, all that had not taken off. And what I realized at that point was I think of so many people like, oh, I'm just going to spend I'm going to become a writer and I'm going to sit down and write. But what they don't realize is you have a life, you have responsibilities. And what you have to do is be like, I'm going to put the writing or the creating into the open spaces. And so that's what I have done, is that I still have all these other responsibilities, but I make sure every day that I spend some time on doing the things that are important to me. And the other reason I do that is because when, I lost my sister, and I lost my sister's coming up on 24 years. I lost my dad 11 years ago, and I think it's 11, or yeah, it's 11, and it's coming up on 4,
Wow.
no, 3 for my mom, and and I just keep coming back to and like I said in the very beginning, was my mom really supporting the creative, and she had all these sorts of creative things. She'll tell you she wasn't a creative person, but she would always be. My mom had stacks of magazines of ideas and things that she wanted to do, and I just think of that, and it's like, okay, what did my mom want most for me? And when my grandmother died, her mother, and I was a senior at Ball State, it was it's 7 months after my sister died. There was a sum of money that was found, and so each of the 3 sisters got some. And my mom then took it by 3. There were 3 of us left, and my older siblings got money for down payments toward homes. And I was a senior in college, and she said, I want to buy you a laptop and a printer. And that was so that I could write. And that's how I got my first Mac laptop. So I think of my mom, and who did my mom want? It wasn't that my mom wanted this for me. She wanted to help me be who I wanted to be. And so to me, that's one of the things that keeps me going. And, I can't do this full time. I don't make the money. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, it doesn't pay my bills. I have a job that pays my bills. And I just keep working at it, hoping that the day will come that I'll be able to do this and be able to pay my bills and more.
Well, I think what's been really remarkable is I met you around the time that you were shifting into wanting to get away from writing about surviving or living after suicide, right? And working with people who had suicide, and then looking at how people just live a fuller life. So you were expanding into life coaching and all the activities that you do, which you do everything. You play tennis, you play golf, but what always struck me is you do things for the enjoyment of doing, not to become an expert, not to become the best, not to compete, just to have fun and spend a little time with somebody or spend some time outside. Like all these things that really do give me anxiety, how you do all the things that you do. It's like it's like a Passover in a way that is light and enjoyable, and it strips out all the things, all the drudgery. Oh, I have to go practice today. Oh, I have to go do this. It's not like that. You may go play tennis, 10 times a summer or whatever. It's not something you have to do every single week, but you make a point of doing it and you enjoy it and you have a good time.
Well, the reason I don't do these things to be competitive or to be the best, because I'm terrible at most of them.
Yes, but you have a pink golf bag.
Well, I'm really bad, and I had hurt my shoulder I think it's been 2 years now. I have not played tennis in a while, though I'd like to. And the golf, the hardest thing is there's not the one thing, and I'm 45, is the realization that there's not enough time to do everything. And that's one of the things that I struggle with. And it's like, okay, but you have to make, like, I try in the evenings, having been married before, and it didn't work, sadly. I mean, I say that in a sense that, I don't say that in a sense because I'm very happy with what I have. Obviously, it worked out. But it's, you look back and you're like, oh, it's sad that it didn't work. But then that it's good that it didn't work because you're happy and you can see where you're supposed to move on. But one of the things I try to make a point of is that I don't work in the evening, is that I spend time with Greg now. Lately, honestly, I'm really bored with television and kind of bored of other people's interpretations of things. And I've decided that really I need to focus on my own, which means writing. And so I've been, I'm looking for other things to do in the evening other than sitting in front of the TV. And, but I make a point that when he gets home, that's it. I'm pretty much out of what I call the sweatshop for the day, unless he has some grommets to do. But then I can't really follow him in there because then dogs follow in and we're always worried someone's going to get hit by a hammer. And so I just try. And then, we have things we do together on weekends, and And I just try to make sure that the time with him doesn't get lost in this. And I don't have kids. And that's part of the reason that I don't have children, is because I see where you can't have it all. I don't care what anyone says, something has to give. And I've made the choice that it's better for me to focus on the creativity, on the writing and all these, the sewing and all these other things, and birthing projects, birthing books. I have a joke with the priest I do spiritual direction with at the monastery here. He's like, so how many months along are you now with the latest book? And I just found that works better for me. And you have to pick and choose what's most important to you.
So let's talk about, because you do have, you migrated through all these things. You wrote a fiction book that you gave everyone at your wedding. Where in all of this, when did you start making bags? Because I feel that is, you've tried a lot of different pathways. And this is the first, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, that's it. I get it. That's almost the culmination of everything that you've been working towards. It's a little painting. It's a little sewing. It's a lot of creativity. There's a lot, everything that you have done has led to those, and what you're doing with them, especially your little post today with the red suits and the red bags and how you're piecing. So how did you stumble upon them, or how did they come? How did they come to be?
There was on the last page of Vogue every month, they just spotlight some really expensive thing, and they had a bucket bag one day. And I am constantly complaining that I see things, or I want certain things and they're not available. And I'm going to talk I'll say that specifically to clothes. I see all these cute shorts. Well, I would rather have a mini skirt than a pair of shorts personally, but everything's in these cute pairs of shorts, these cute colors and such. And I had an idea based on a bag that my mom had in the closet she took to the beach the few times we would go to the ocean, or take a trip or whatever. And it was a bucket bag, and I wanted to take the swimsuit that I had worn as a child, that she had kept, and take those colors and turn it into a bucket bag, which I did. And unfortunately, the bad news is that I'm still trying to figure out how to keep it from cracking. And I actually didn't really like the size a whole lot for everyday use. It's really good it's a tall bag. It's great for other things, but for me, every day, it didn't work. And so there were a couple. Then I had someone say, hey, so I made 3 different sizes. Then it turned into, somebody said, can you make a tote bag? So I made a tote bag. And then I created this. A couple of people said, how about a smaller bag? And I was like, that would really work for me. So then I created the handbag. And in this time, this is right before the wedding that this all happened, but I knew I couldn't do anything about it until after the wedding was over. And we decided, or I said to Greg, we were in Los Angeles, I said, let's go to the garment district. And we did, and we just discovered this whole new world. And I was like, you know what? I can do this. I can make my own stuff. And then other people say, hey, I want one of those. And so it turned into making other things. And then it's also turned into clothes. It's coming along a little more slowly than I had hoped, but I'm trying to be patient with it, because one of the things what I'm realizing is happening is that I find that I like the prints of a lot of things, but I don't necessarily like the style of a dress or something. But I might have bought it. I'm looking at what's in my closet now because I liked the print. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I just need to make my own prints and my own designs. And that's one of the things I'm working on now. But at the same time, because I can't necessarily do that, is I'm also perfecting the sewing aspect, which I won't be doing the sewing forever. So I'll have to eventually source that out. But for now, I had somebody I know wanted to be a fashion designer, and she told me that she had a tailor in fashion school who just said, you have to learn to sew. And she goes, why do I have to learn to sew? Because I'm going to just be designing. You have to learn how to sew. You have to know how things work, because a lot of clothes don't work. Mm-hmm. And that's because they don't work because people don't get that they don't work for, body shape. Exactly. The construction's terrible. And, so I know that we have this fast fashion thing happening right now where, the millennials are throwing clothes away because they're getting them so cheaply. but I think it'll switch. I think it's going to come back around. But the other thing is, I think most people would rather have quality clothes of something they really like. And I want it to be things that you'll hang on to forever, like my mom did with the several dresses that she did keep. And that even, that are classic, but, you may never wear again. But like when I go to these estate sales and I pick these dresses out, I love knowing that these women kept these dresses in their closets from the 1960s.
Yeah.
That's the best thing. And that's where the pink pantsuit came from. This woman had pantsuits like you wouldn't believe. And she had this really great pink one. Her name was Jeanette. So I call it Jeanette's pink pantsuit. The bags that I made, and I'll actually be using some striped, be doing some stripes with it because there's not a lot of fabric left. And so for me, the estate sales have been, I didn't know what to do with double knit polyester. Well, now I do. I can make handbags, and I actually have bought some. I'm getting ready to make myself a dress. And until I can get my own fabrics, I'm like, you know what? I find these cool patterns. I'm just going to play with it. I don't care if it's polyester double knit, I'm going to do it anyway. And so there's just I have too many things on my plate. Of course I do. That's typical of me. But at the same time, it's this exploration of, Greg said to me the other day, I said, I was reading the Astronaut Wives Club, and I said, I just feel like I missed out on something because I was born after the first moon landing. And he goes, yeah, you're a girl before her time. And I just feel such a connection to the 60s, not politically, but just to the style and certain things about the culture. And I was born in 71. I don't remember any of that, but I remember the 70s a little bit, and I just have always felt connected to certain things. And now I'm like, it's time to make those things happen. And then and I love going into these estate sales because some of these houses are time capsules, for good or bad, for better or for worse. But you see so much about what life was like that I think we forget, and that helps my writing.
Oh, I can see the green dress. You were inspired by a green dress and you made up a whole story around the garment that you found at an estate sale. Yes,
exactly. And the home, the home that Sally, the woman who lived there, that her home was based on this home I had been in, and that this woman had so much stuff you wouldn't believe, but it told a story in itself. But then I made up a story based on it. But I went into that house, and I just, every once in a while I go into a house and I just feel something, and it's like, wow, I have a story to tell based on this. Or we'll see a house for sale or something. I'll be like, oh, I just want to know. But then it's like, no, what can I do with this? Because that's not feasible for us to move into that house. But you
can make a story about it.
Exactly.
I think too, because you bring you name all your bags, right? They all have names. They all have personalities. Like I think what struck me was just seeing this whole thing sort of tie together in a very perfect way that was very natural. Like the whole process, as you have said all along, has been sticking with things and writing and doing little bits here. You've kept at it, and it's all sort of landed into, it's just like watching something bloom. It's been really, really cool to see the whole thing happen.
And you've seen the whole thing happen.
Yeah, I really have. I mean, from when you first started with the life coaching and the cooking and trying to, connect those two, and your heart was in it, but it different. Like you did it, but the way that this has all unfolded, and just how excited and happy, and because you do travel a little bit and are able to go to places and pick up fabric, and you are able to continue to look at magazines and some of the resources, which I guess I should ask, why don't you talk about all the different places you pull inspiration from? You've talked about a lot of them, estate sales and homes, and I would say food maybe, but where else? Or is that your prime place house?
Those are probably, but the other thing that I didn't really think about until the last couple of years was all the stories that people had told me. That spending time, and a lot of these people sadly aren't here. I mean, people say to me, I would have all these sort of older people I would spend time with, and that probably comes from having lost. All my grandparents were gone by the time I was 22 or 23. And so I've just always, everybody has a story to tell, and I read the obituaries, not every day, but I read the obituaries of the Albuquerque Journal because I look at the stories that people have, and then I go into these houses, and a lot of people came here from other places. They came here after the war, after the bomb was built, and they built a life in this place that was very different than the East, or Midwest, where they were from, but they had the sunshine, and so, not just people here, but people in all walks of life, and having been all over the world and spent time with people and in their lives. And I've always stayed with people, and people I didn't know. I would go stay with people for talks, and I'd be staying with someone, like I said, I stayed with my pen pals that I had never met before in Luxembourg, Sweden, and Norway, and there was inspiration in that, going to Sweden and seeing the fabrics. And at that time, it was 2005. And my friend said, the fabric stores are closing because people aren't doing this anymore. But they had such cool stuff. They had stuff you see at IKEA. And so those, and the other thing is I'll just, I'll peruse Etsy or eBay. The vintage patterns are inspiring. And that's been one of my struggles, is that in terms of, like I said, I don't want to watch television because I realize that if I'm not watching something that's authentically from the 60s or 70s, that's somebody's interpretation of what it was like. And I don't want that. I want to know firsthand what it was like. And so that's the other thing. I spend time looking at the newspapers, the Albuquerque Journal, they actually don't have physical copies. You have to get it online, which is a little bit of it's good you can do it at home, but it just takes a long time to load. And Greg and I have gone down to the library, the Special Collections Library, and they have this fashion, it's called the Shopper Guide that the librarian pulled for me. And they're like 1958 to like 62, and they would get this in the mail once a month, and they would feature a home. And then there were a couple of hotels would say, oh, we're doing this month, we're featuring this. And just a really interesting take on, they had a lot of home decorating stuff. And so there was actually a house not too far from us that was up for sale. And the original house is in there. And it's interesting because the house has been completely, they've taken, because everybody had walls in those days, and they've made a very open floor plan. And just to see the photos of what it was like then. And so there are a lot of different places that I think that I pull it from, and you never know when you're going. And I continue to look. I try not to shop so much anymore because I have a closet full of dresses that now I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make my own stuff. But there, you never know what you're going to see that may inspire in some way. But I probably get more inspired by the older stuff now than seeing anything new. And I just love to see the colors and you never know what pile of fabric.
It's always a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. So it's almost like without having any preconceived notion of what's happening and knowing that you're going to go to this place. Do you ever go to a place? I'm sure you go to some that it's just, there's nothing here.
Well, this morning there's a one this morning, and I went and there was Greg. I don't know why. I can't even answer the question why he wanted Clue, but he wanted some board games for his classroom. He teaches high school Spanish, and so I found a 1956 version of Clue that I brought home, but that was it. There wasn't anything there. But I tell people it's like every 4 or 5 estate sales, I come home with one. I'll come home with a whole bunch of stuff, and Greg told me, because it's not that I have a problem with the stuff, it's we have to have a place to put it. So that typically means I have to do some shifting or something has to leave the house. So I think I try to think really hard before I come home with anything. And I have stuff from my family that was, or my friend Bonnie. I mean, things that have been given to me from people. Like my desk is the kitchen table that my parents bought when they got married and got their first house. And I guess they moved in 64.
I've always loved that you have all these, you have a lot of really interesting collections of things that have a really interesting history and really all mid-century. I mean, you have a treasure of mid-century.
Thank you. And, really my ex-husband is the reason for all of that. I think that what he taught me, there were a lot of things I learned from him, but his father was in the antique business. And so he grew up around it. I had actually started going, my whole reason for going to estate sales 20 years ago was because I was collecting, of all things, Pillsbury Doughboy things. And it was because we had this doll from my grandmother's, the stuffed doll from my grandmother's house. And he had a whole personality. And the joke was we were collecting his brothers. And I would go to estate sales looking for his stuff. So, I mean, I've been doing estate sales since I was like 23. And I stopped doing that. But with my ex-husband, he would buy things. And I'd introduced him to eBay when eBay started, and so he started buying things to sell on eBay, and so it took a while. It was interesting. We had bought this house, and the walls were white, and we kept the walls white, and it took a couple of years for me to start to see how, and I learned a lot from Bonnie too about this, how to make color work on the walls. And my mom had always had color. We always had colored walls, but it took me a while. And a friend of mine once said to me a long time ago, she said, I can't believe how patient you are to collect the perfect furniture for your house. And it really has been that, it took a while to get things, there's still things I'm looking for. My dining room table definitely, it barely has room for 6. I'm looking for a bigger table, but just to be patient that eventually you'll find just the right things to decorate or to be useful, and being willing to sometimes let go of things that may have worked but don't work now. But that was, and I have a lot of things I've gotten rid of over the years. Some I'm glad, some I'm sorry. But I had moved twice across the country in a year and a half, and I had to get rid of things. And so I do think that I don't feel like I'm a hoarder kind of person. I think my house is still pretty, Veronica could come in and clean it pretty easily. She's not dusting all day long because I don't have that much stuff, but I try to make it look so that there's just enough. And the other thing that Greg's style is very different than me, but his family, because his grandfather was Secretary of State, was Dean Rusk, that, we have interesting objects from that. And so to be able to incorporate those into my house to bring his family history in as well has been it's really neat to be able to do that. And I don't know, I think my mom was it's really my mom. She like my older sister said, she did the best she could for the money that she had. And she didn't have, my mom was not an estate sale, garage sale person. She didn't do any of that where people say, oh, my parents, always, like my ex-husband was raised doing that. I wasn't raised we had them. We didn't go to them. We didn't ever buy anything. We had them to sell things. And so I think that a lot of, I see my mom I was allowed to move furniture around in my bedroom, my sister's room, and redo, put new things on the walls and to do those things that probably gave me a jump start for later. But then it took a lot of time after I was married the first time to really get a sense of what my style was. And then I was very lucky that I have a lot of furniture we have this couch and these 2 chairs that were in the basement growing up. And my ex-husband and I picked them up from my parents' house and brought them back here and had new cushions put on them. And they're a very unique early 1960s thing that I really appreciate, and they're absolutely perfect in my house.
Well, pretty much everything that you've talked about is sort of the metaphor of little by little, bird by bird. You just do little bits, you hit, you miss, but you just keep after it. And through patience, perseverance, and a trust that you're going to, things will connect, the dots will connect along the way. That's what's happened. And it's been you've been at this a very long time. So I have to ask, as we're getting towards the end, we're trying to keep these at an hour here. How have you dealt with setbacks and frustrations and disappointments? Or do you have those, or competition or jealousy, or how do you deal with some of the negatives that are human things to feel and experience? How have you if you've dealt with that, or if you've encountered them, how do you deal with them and move through them or past them or whatever?
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason I had the discipline to move forward, I learned a lot of things from competitive running in junior high and high school, goal setting and how to deal with when something happens or you get injured or whatever it is. And so I think that's been hugely beneficial. I believe that the lessons that taught me to move forward after my sister's death came from running. And, one interesting thing that happened was that back in 2005, we had put the pool in the year before, and Trading Spaces, that TV show, came to town. They were interviewing people. And we got together with our neighbors who we spent a lot of time with. This is my first marriage, and we were going to try out. And so James, the guy next door who did construction, and he made this cake. And actually recently opened a restaurant because that's really what he wanted to do. And but he made this really cool cake. The cake broke in half on the way up there. We hit a bump, and and we didn't move past the first stage because we weren't obnoxious enough. Ultimately, what I think is happening. And I was so mad because I just felt like we had so much to offer, and we didn't get picked. I think in the long run, it's okay. I don't think about I don't have the respect for that show that I did at that time, but I got so mad that I said, all right, we have to do some remodeling. We have to do something. So this was like January, and the first thing we did was the guest room. We had one at the time. You've been in my house, and this is before it was added on. So there were only 3 bedrooms, and one was my office. There was the master bedroom. There was a third room. And that was what we did. We painted that room turquoise, and, I got some new bedding, and, and I probably made some pillows. I don't even remember now. And then I decided that wasn't enough. And that's when we decided, this is March, like 2 months later, we decided to do the big addition on the house, which then turned into, we tore down an indoor patio. We added on a room. We added on upstairs a master suite.
Got a whole new house out of the deal.
Yeah, pretty much the whole house. And then during the process, I said, we can't do this without redoing the kitchen because the kitchen's going to look terrible. So the kitchen got redone. And so I always believe that somewhere in the awful things that happen, and I'm continually faced with loss in my life, the continued deaths of people that I care about, because I can't bring them back. I can't change things, but there's always some sort of opportunity. So when I have a bad day, and they're there, it's rough because it's, you're trying to keep yourself motivated. You're trying to keep yourself in a bubble, and you're not affected by the stupid things that people do and say and you see and the things that happen, or the things you miss out on. But I just try to be like, okay, for better, for worse, what's on the list today, or what can I do that's going to make me feel good? And I was faced with that Saturday. I felt, I really was feeling a little overwhelmed of, oh my gosh, I have so much to do because I've got this party coming up and I'm nowhere I near want to be with this swimwear. And I was cutting some bags, and we went to church. We went to mass, and I was like, what should I do? I just had a really bad feeling. And by the time we left, I was like, okay, what 2 things do I really want to do tomorrow? And I made those pink bags, the Jeanette's pink pantsuit. And then I'm working on a stuffed doll of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which has been a whole nother spiritual thing that I'm working on this year. And I got the bags finished. I didn't finish the doll. And that was simply because, well, right now her shoulders are a little too big, but Greg says that's probably because she's carrying the weight of the world on them, so it's okay. And she's not finished, and she's partially stuffed right now. But I was one of those things where sometimes it's letting it go and just saying, or when things that people do, or when I know people have accomplished more than me, and I get pissed off because I'm like, well, I've been at this longer and I've done so much more. And I'm just like, okay, I have to let it go. Help me to let it go and just focus on what I can do, because that's all I can do. I have to let so much go. Or when somebody does something stupid or says something stupid, when I'm out running the dogs and I deal with people who aren't so bright, and it's helped me to let it go and just focus on me. And I think I learned that from running, because running was really like, okay, it's you and the clock. You can't worry about where everybody else is.
Well, I think that's a great place to end.
This has been another episode of My Life Creative with Richard Zombeck and Pamela Joy. You can find us online at MyLifeCreative.com, where you'll find more information about us, our guests, and while you're there, please consider supporting the show to help us produce more content like this.
Oh yeah, can you feel it? Just over the credits, just riffing now. Words and chords. Not the poetry and the real thing, but not bad for an ad-lib. Not good, but... And it's not long enough, so just do a little bit more. And that's nearly done. That's the final credit there. That's the end.